All right, good afternoon and welcome to Raleigh City Council's Growth and Natural Resources Committee meeting. We today have just one item on our agenda. It's sanitary sewer overflows. We'll get a staff presentation. We have one person signed up for public comment, and then we will discuss the item among our committee members. I wanted to just quickly introduce the topic and say City of Raleigh has one of the lowest sanitary sewer overflow or SSO ratings in the country, which is something we should all be very proud of, but that didn't happen by accident. It is the result of strategic planning and preventative maintenance by our staff, investment in our utility system by past councils, and customers taking simple steps to prevent grease and flushed wipes from going down the drain. Today, we're going to get both a level set and a deeper dive on this topic. And with that, I hand over the meeting to our Assistant City Manager, Tansy Hayward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So for viewers at home, they'll know that sometimes they join our committee meetings and there are action items. Today's presentation is informational only. So we're not asking for any recommendation back to the full council, but we have two staff members primarily with us today. TJ Lynch, who is an assistant director over our sanitary sewer or operations. And then also we have Eileen Neverett, who works in our capital programs. So both of them will go through detailed information about the impacts that both our operations and capital investments have on our efforts to reduce and eliminate sanitary sewer overflows where possible. So with this, I'll hand it over to TJ Lynch.
Thank you, Tansy. First, let me thank the committee for this opportunity to present on SSOs, so our sanitary sewer overflows. We have presented before, so this is an update. It is a very important topic, so we really do appreciate having us present for this presentation. Here we have some slides. Next slide, please. So first, we're just going to jump right into it. And I think the first question we have to answer is, what is a sanitary sewer overflow, for those who don't know? And basically, there is a collection system that collects the sewer from all of our customers in the service area. And that collection system conveys the wastewater to our treatment plants for treatment. In the event that wastewater somehow escapes the pipe on its way to the treatment plant, that is a release of untreated wastewater and also known as a sanitary sewer overflow, or SSO as we'll refer to them going forward. There are numerous causes for SSOs, but they primarily fall into 5 categories. Grease accumulates within the pipe and causes backups and blockages. We have debris, which includes flushed wipes. Roots are a problem in the collection system. And then there are also acid failures and excessive wet weather flows that lead to inflow or infiltration into our system and really overwhelm the capacity of the system. Slide, please. Slide. Okay, so those assets in the ground that we're talking about are the sanitary sewer piping. It's a vast piping network. It's made up of over 2,400 miles of gravity main, and then also about a little over 130 miles of force main. Force mains are those pipes that leave a pump station. So anytime you have a pressurized pipe that's where the sanitary sewer has to be pumped uphill, that pipe is considered a force main. In total, we have over 2,500 miles of sanitary sewer piping to operate and maintain. The division within Raleigh Water, who's primarily responsible for the maintenance of those pipes, is the Sewer Maintenance Division. And in fiscal year 2021, their annual operating budget was a little over $13.6 million, of which about $5 million is allocated to the actual operation and maintenance of the system. Next slide, please. So a little more about that division. The Sewer Maintenance Division, you can see some of which are pictured here. I think Robert may be in that picture there somewhere. But anyway, we have 125 assigned positions in this division. Happy to report that this division is ISO 14001 certified. That is an environmental management system. It's a continuous improvement system so that we have processes in place to continuously improve the performance. That management system is also third-party verified. But also within the division is a pretty hefty fleet of vehicles. This division is very heavy in fleet, with 20 flush trucks, 6 CCTV trucks, and a whole host of forestry equipment and heavy construction equipment for accessing the sanitary sewer and also repairing it. Next slide, please. Now, the collection system does have federal and state requirements in terms of how it's operated, how it's maintained, and the performance of that system. The EPA, from the federal perspective, has a zero tolerance policy for sanitary sewer overflows. And we were audited against that policy in 2011. That was a very thorough multi-day audit that ultimately resulted in a notice of violation, but no consent order or consent decree was issued from the EPA, unlike many of our peers. Very fortunate for that. But I will say that EPA has followed up with us a couple of times, twice actually, since 2011, to make sure that we were following the plan that we laid out for them. We showed them what our pipe replacement schedule looked like, our capital program, and that in and of itself was sufficient enough to them not to issue a consent order or decree. And like I said, they've checked in twice to make sure that we've followed the schedule that we've laid out. And we have. The NOV was simply issued because we in our system have experienced SSOs. And anytime the EPA issues does an audit, if you've had an SSO, that is a violation of the rules, and a notice was issued for that. On the state level, Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Water Resources, to address the EPA's, the federal concerns about sanitary sewer overflows, have issued collection system permits to collection systems across the state of North Carolina. They started with the largest and have worked their way down to the smaller systems. Associated with those audits or those permits are annual audits. So every year, the state gives us a call and says, we'd like to come see you tomorrow. And they pay us a visit and look over all of our documentation, look over all of our performance records. Fortunately, we have a very, very good staff, and those audits have generally turned out positive outcomes. And in fact, every time has been a positive outcome. And we're often referred to in the state as the example by the staff who conducts those audits. They see a lot of systems, so that's definitely a compliment to our staff and to our processes. Next slide, please. An additional regulatory requirement included in our collection system permit is the amount of the system that we clean each year. Like we mentioned before, we have roughly 2,500 miles of piping, and the requirement is that we clean 10% of that system each year. Fortunately, we have been able to clean in excess of the 10%. But we have had years with higher percentages cleaned when we've cleaned only the pipes within right-of-ways. In the past 4 years, we've focused on cleaning pipes within easements, and those are by nature just more difficult and more timely because of easement obstructions, fences, pipes, things that we have to work with. We're in people's backyards, and it's just a more difficult job, so the productivity goes down. Next slide, please. Reportable SSOs, you can see in this graph, it's a good picture. Since 2006, the overall trend is a downward trend in reportable sanitary sewer overflows. We're very proud of that. But just a few years ago, we realized that we really needed to start looking at this data in a little more granular way. So next slide, please. So we decided to start tracking not only reportable SSOs, but non-reportable SSOs. And so what is the regulatory requirement for reportable? It's basically any amount of sanitary sewer that leaves the pipe and reaches surface water. Any amount, a single gallon reaches surface water, it is required to be reported. or any amount greater than 1,000 gallons, whether it reaches surface water or not. Non-reportable is just less than 1,000 gallons and doesn't reach surface water. But we still feel that, from an environmental protection standpoint, it is important to monitor all spills and use that in our investigations and look for systemic problems in our system. Next slide. Just to keeping with the getting more granular in our data, you can see that not only are we tracking total SSOs, but we break down those SSOs into what's reportable and non-reportable here. But we also even further break it down into dry weather and wet weather, because there are different ways to address the causes, if you will, depending on whether it's dry weather or a wet weather type overflow. You can see that looking at the numbers there, the wet weather, you can see the significant, I think it's really important to point this out, but the significant decrease in wet weather reportable overflows. Highly attribute that to the work that we've done in our capital program to replace our interceptors and to address those capacity issues, especially for wet weather. Like I said, we also are tracking total reportable and total non-reportable there. If you look at the data over 10 years or more, you will see that downward trend. In the last 3 years, we have seen a bit of an uptick in our overflows and have plans for how we will address those overflows that I will talk about. Next slide, please. So even more granular, SSOs by cause. It's easy to think about an overflow occurring and just not really knowing why. But it's important to us in our investigation to determine what the cause of failure was, because that changes how we keep it from happening again. It really goes to how we prevent. And as you can see, we've had a number of asset failures, contractor damage. Honestly, the contractor damage there doesn't account for all the contractor damage we've seen. We've seen a lot of damage with the smaller fiber installations and like service lines and that sort of thing. We've seen a lot of that in the past few years. Debris is a category that includes flushed wipes, is like we like to call them. Wipes are generally an issue for us. Those wipes tend to adhere to the pipe, especially if there's a grease accumulation in the pipe. It'll adhere to roots. And anytime that you have adherence within the pipe, you're going to get some buildup of material that ultimately will cause a backup and an overflow. Grease is still one of our greatest causes of overflows. It's a customer behavior issue that we try to address with education. We'll continue to try to do that and are looking for new ways to do that all the time. In the roots category, you see a significant uptick in the overflows associated with roots. We have a plan to resume chemical root control in 2021, 2022. And it is actually part of our budget package that will be coming forward. Significant need there. We've seen many more roots in the system than we've seen historically. The storms, we can't, severe storms are always a problem, always going to be a problem. It's difficult because, if you think about the pipes in our system, where they're generally located in low-lying areas next to streams and creeks. And when those streams and creeks rise, they come out of their banks, our system generally goes underwater. And with manhole covers can get lifted off. There are openings in manhole covers. There are vents that allow water in, and it creates that is infiltration, and creates major issues for us as a utility, because not only is it an issue for the capacity in the collection system, but it also becomes an issue at the treatment plants as well, because we will whatever water gets in the pipe and gets conveyed to the treatment plant, we treat. Occasionally, we've had to deal with some vandalism. Next slide, please. Now, we've talked about numbers of SSOs, and although that's really important to count the number of SSOs you occur, when you think about environmental impact, it's really about the volume of wastewater that gets into the stream or the volume of sewer. And I think historically our volumes have been fairly low for a system our size. There is one outlier there. You see 2018. That was a significant year for rain events. If you remember, I believe Hurricane Florence was in 2018, as well as that late fall 4.28-inch rainfall in just a few hours that caused severe flooding in the Raleigh area. Those two events alone contributed significantly to that very high number. But on average, so in the first on the graph to the left, you can see that's a total volume, and we're talking about like in 2020, 1.8 million gallons. In terms of the billions of gallons we treat each year, that's a very, very small fraction. But when you also look at it in terms of the amount of sanitary sewer that was spilled per overflow, that's the metric that we're using in our divisions, and that's where we're setting goals around that to reduce that number annually. We've been in 2019, so you can see we're averaging about 25,000 gallons of spill. We are continuing to work hard to push that down. Next slide, please. And so there are a number of factors to consider that impact the performance of the system. And staff resources are a big one. You know, if we don't have the people to run the equipment, to do the work, then that leaves a gap in productivity. And the sewer maintenance division, we're averaging about a 12% vacancy rate. So that has had some impact on the amount of crews that we can put in the field to do the work. COVID-19 has certainly had an impact, especially in the early months of COVID-19. We completely withdrew from preventive maintenance for a period of time. We wanted to get, we needed to better understand the virus and how we could safely put our staff back out there. There were rumors and information out there that even the mist or that comes off of the cleaning operation could have COVID in it and cause impacts to our staff. And we didn't want to put them in that position until we had a much better idea how we could protect them. So we have ratcheted that back up, but it definitely had an impact on our productivity in terms of flushing the system or cleaning the system. Aging infrastructure is always an issue in our system. We'll always be battling that. And so, when you have aging infrastructure, that infrastructure is if it's severely aged, it's on the edge of failure. And so we have had instances where we've had some major failures that have led to overflows. Inflow, we've talked about, associated with wet weather. It has a major impact. That water is amazing how it's able to find its way into the system, but it does through the manhole covers, through joints that are able to push in. And it's just, I guess it's an area of lower pressure where, the water can push in. And we see significant flows. Generally, we'll see 2 to 3 times the amount of flow in our system associated with a heavy rain event. And then there are external impacts, things that aren't always in our control. We've seen elevated levels of grease and wipes from multifamily dwellings. And this is an education area for us. We've really, our sewer maintenance division have come up with some really good ideas for how to address that, but it is a customer behavior issue that we have to find a way to influence. Contractor damage, like I said, it increased with fiber installations, but we do see contractor damage from time to time. And severe weather impacts, certainly we can't control the weather, and it has a severe impact on the performance of the system. Next slide, please. And so within the division, the sewer maintenance division, we're constantly looking for ways to improve. It is part of our culture. It is part of the ISO 14001 management system. And so, one of the ways that we can do that is by stopping an overflow as fast as we can. You know, we have a reward system for customers who call. Anybody who sees an SSO occurring can call that in and actually get a reward for that. Get a reward for reporting that SSO. But as soon as we get the word about an SSO, you know, we're on our way. We're stopping, and then we have a procedure for when we get there. Our staff are trained to stop, and they contain, they collect, and they restore. And so the whole goal here is to minimize environmental impact. The stop part is, you know, the first thing we're going to be doing, actually, we're doing some of these activities in parallel, but we're stopping the overflow first. We are building dams generally downstream to stop the water flow so that we can collect that wastewater and we pump it back into the collection system. And then we restore that area. We'll wash down the creeks. We seed if we need to. We just do whatever we have to do to try to restore that environment to its natural state. And our staff are well trained on that and do a great job at it. Next slide, please. But the work doesn't stop there after an SSO. There is certainly the regulatory requirements that we have to engage. There's notification processes where we have to report this overflow to the Division of Environmental Quality or the Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Water Resources. They need to know about this within 24 hours. Within 24 hours of the spill. And then there's also the formal press release for anything over 5,000 gallons and a formal public advertisement in a newspaper for anything over 15,000 gallons. Those are the regulatory activities that will generally follow, but there are also additional activities. Our staff goes into investigator mode, and they will try to find the cause of the overflow. And then depending on what that cause was, they'll address it. For example, you know, if it's found to be a grease-related spill, they'll go upstream and distribute educational materials to any of the upstream dwellings. And we'll also look for commercial users. So, you know, are there restaurants on this line? Do we need to look at their grease traps? Do we need to do other additional investigation there to find out how this grease got into the system and how we can prevent it again? CCTV is also a very powerful tool. You know, CCTV is basically, it's a camera that we're able to put inside the pipe. One of the benefits that we have on the wastewater side is because it's gravity, it's not a full pipe, it's not pressurized. So we can put a camera in there and look at not only the condition of the pipe, but look at and go upstream and look at, are we seeing grease accumulation? Is there a particular service line that grease appears to be coming from? And so there will ultimately be that investigation to determine the root cause and the source if possible. Next slide. The picture that you see here actually is an example of CCTV footage. That picture is the inside of a pipe, and you can actually see roots hanging down inside of that pipe. I'm not sure if the clarity is good enough for you to be able to see those roots, but they're in there. That's what roots look like. And then as other materials flow down the pipe, they can attach themselves to the roots and ultimately cause a blockage. But the goal here is to determine the defect. If a defect exists, what led to the SSO, and document it. We do a lot of documentation, and we create a lot of data, and we use that data to look for systemic problems. Next slide. Also, if we have had an SSO at a location multiple times, really it only takes a second time. If we have an SSO at the same place out of the same manhole the second time, and it doesn't have to be within a short period of time, it can be within a few years, we're going to add that spot to what we call our hotspot management list. There are over 400 of those locations within our service area, and as you can see, the vast majority of those are in Raleigh for a lot of reasons. But Raleigh has generally an older system, certainly more mature trees over the system, around the system. That ultimately creates this. Also, more grease generators of food. There's more restaurants. There's just more people, and so that all of that ultimately leads to, the factors that cause SSOs. You can see of our hotspots what the general causes are. Grease is by far the largest number are the largest root cause, if you will, of the hot spots, with roots being a close second. And then adverse weather. We've had some areas where we've had some capacity issues, and when we have a large rain event, we know that we need to go to those places because we're likely to have problems there. And the debris is a growing one. It's the flushed wipes. That's been a growing problem in our system, and that's actually being seen nationally. So there's a lot of work being done in that area, and we're keeping tabs on what we can do there to address those better. Next slide. So, I've shared with you a lot of performance related things, but what I haven't done is to put it in perspective for you. To put it in perspective, I think that we have to show you how we're performing compared to others. Certainly, we measure ourselves against ourselves all the time, but we don't. When we get the opportunity to measure ourselves against others, we do. We've blacked out the names of the towns in this graph just to protect the innocent or the guilty, however you want to look at it. But the metric that we use the most to compare ourselves is SSOs per 100 miles of pipe. That data gets normalized, so it really doesn't matter what size utility you are. We can compare our data because it's normalized. The red bar, where you see the 1.59, that's Raleigh. These are the top 20. I would say the largest 20 utilities in the state of North Carolina. And that's where we rank in terms of our performance. And I will say our system is much, much larger than all but one. Charlotte certainly has a larger system than we do, but ours is the second largest by a long shot. But that's how we're performing, 1.59. Now, to put that 1.59 into perspective, what the EPA is generally looking for are utilities that have an SSO rate higher than 2.0. They told us that during our audits, and I've heard that from them since. 2.0 is kind of that trigger mark where they will start to look at you more closely, if you will. If you're performing under 2.0, I think they believe that you're doing a pretty good job. And I believe that we're doing a pretty good job. Certainly, there's always room for improvement. Next slide, please. And so, looking into the future, what are the things that we're doing? Not just the future, but even currently. I told you earlier that we have identified fats, oils, and grease problems downstream from multifamily properties. That is a very consistent thing that we see across the service area. And so our very smart folks in our fats, oils, and grease program within the sewer maintenance division have come up with these resource kits. And so they've gone to the multifamily property managers. They've met with them. They've provided these kits. And so when people move in to the multifamily residences, they're provided with this information and educated right up front before they move into that facility about what the expectations are in terms of what they can put down their drain and what they can't. That has been really received well by the multifamily property manager community, and we're looking at expanding that program to others where we think it can provide benefit. Also, we've launched some innovative technology, if you will. Acoustic technology is a new tool in the tool bag for us. It's actually called the SL Rat that we have deployed. We've purchased 2 of these units, but what they do is they give us the ability to measure from one manhole to the next. We measure the acoustic, the sound waves as they move. So on one end, you will launch the sound, and on the other end, you'll receive the sound. And what that does is it creates an acoustic baseline, if you will, for that particular pipe segment. And it can tell you based on what that signature is, that acoustic signature, whether there are potentially dips in the pipe or abnormalities or broken pipes or blockages within the pipe. It can tell you quite a bit. But the key here is to develop a baseline signature for every pipe segment and then measure against that baseline going forward. So we're still in the process. We have a very large system, so we're still in the process of building our baseline. And honestly, this is a very, very good tool, because traditionally we've had to use CCTV, or we've gone out and just flushed lines randomly. And so when you flush lines randomly, you may actually be cleaning or recleaning a pipe that's already clean. And so what this SLRAT does is gives us the ability to better steer our other resources so that we get the use out of them that we need. We want them actually identifying areas that we need to address where we can reduce SSOs or prevent those backflows from occurring, those backups. So that's in the works now. Other opportunities going forward, we've talked about chemical root control just a little. We've seen a significant spike in the roots in our system, and so we'll be starting back up that program hopefully in the next year. Our educational outreach, like I said, so much of what happens inside of the pipe is the result of our customers' behavior, right? How they use the system, the things that they put down the drain, and so educational outreach is huge for us, and anything that we can do to better get to our customers is going to pay dividends. And we also ultimately just need to continue to fund our capital expenditures. We're replacing pipes. Old pipes are going to have a lot of generally defects associated with them that can cause materials to hang up. We also are addressing capacity issues when we're replacing pipes that help us in wet weather. New pipes are much tighter and don't allow for as much inflow and infiltration to occur. So there are numerous benefits to continuing our capital expenditures. Next slide. That is how we're addressing sanitary sewer overflows from the operational perspective. For the CIP perspective, I'm going to turn it over now to Eileen Navarrete, our CIP manager.
Thanks, TJ. So I want to start by taking us back to one of TJ's first slides where he talked about what causes an SSO. And you saw his presentation was really focused on grease and debris and roots. And I'm going to dive over the next few minutes a little further into asset failures and as well as excessive wet weather flows. So the first thing I want to talk about are SSOs caused by failures in one of our assets. And what kind of assets am I talking about? Essentially, I'm talking about some of our 2,500 miles of sanitary sewer pipe or anything inside one of our approximately 120 wastewater pump stations as well. The photos that you see on this slide are failures that occurred in our system. The first is along Walnut Creek in 2018, and I believe that is actually during that storm that TJ referenced from the fall of 2018, where we had a whole lot of overflows. This is along Walnut Creek, and then the photo on the right is when Millbrook Road failed in 2016 adjacent to Shelley Lake. The failure of the pipe ultimately caused a sinkhole in Millbrook Road that caused a shutdown of Millbrook Road and was fairly disruptive. Both of these assets are now part of active capital projects. And I'm sure this probably goes without saying, but emergency fixes are far more costly to the utility than proactive rehabilitation and replacement. So the way we address asset failures is through our asset management program. And the goal of the asset management program is to plan the right level of infrastructure investment at the right time to maintain reliable service. So we need to avoid failures for our critical assets, but we also don't want to replace our infrastructure when it still has a number of years of life left in it. So it's really about striking that balance. And to best strike that balance, we have to understand our infrastructure. So we need to understand how old it is, what material is it, what are its operating conditions, have there already been failures on on this piece of infrastructure or similar types of infrastructure. One of the most important things on the sewer side of the house to think about is the collection system is a much more harsh environment than, say, a water distribution system. The sewer gases that are generated in the system are much more likely to cause corrosion and issues, and we don't get the same life cycle out of our collection system infrastructure that we do out of the water distribution system. So we have to be mindful of what materials we use and what conditions we create in the system. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up, but first I want to talk about what we do to best understand our infrastructure. So TJ had lots of graphs. I'm going to try lots of pictures in my portion of the presentation. So let's talk about condition assessment for a moment. Condition assessment it's critical for us. And one of the great things about our sewer system, because for a sewer system that's as large as ours, we don't have a lot of pressurized main. Since most of the system is gravity, it means we can put a camera inside it and physically set our eyes on the inside of the pipe and learn how it's behaving and be able to physically see what the condition of our system is. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is concrete pipe and concrete infrastructure, because we've had a fair amount of it installed in our system, particularly in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And the vast majority of our significant asset failures on the sewer side of the house occur as a result of some type of concrete failure. So let's talk about these photos. The photo on the left, I guess the first thing I should say is nobody got hurt. But that is a photo of our system where during a construction project, a contractor, after being told not to run the equipment over the compromised sewer line, rode his equipment over the compromised sewer line, and the result was a collapse. And that sewer line is particularly shallow. That runs along the north bank of Crabtree Creek. So this was part of the project to rehab that pipe. This is, I think, 2012. That this happened. The second photo is actually of the inside of the Crabtree Creek lift station, which is the second largest lift station in the system. And what I want to point out here are you can see those dark lines running across the photo there. That's reinforcing steel. And when you build a concrete structure, you put steel inside it to reinforce it, and that's basically what gives concrete its tensile strength. And so when you can see the reinforced steel, that means you've already lost a fair amount of concrete, and it means your structure is compromised and you're at risk of a significant failure, because it means the steel is not doing its job in supporting the concrete. So this is the inside of a lift station. The third picture, if you can see similar lines, that's the inside of a concrete pipe. And it's the same concept, that it's a concrete pipe with a reinforced steel cage inside it. And when we put a camera in the pipe and we can see those lines, we know we have a problem. And then the fourth picture is basically what happens to a line, to a pipe, if you aren't able to rehab or replace it once you see those, or if you never get to the point where you see those lines of steel, the fourth picture is your result. So as you can see in the fourth photo, the top of the pipe is gone. And so you're essentially looking at a dirt tunnel with a concrete pipe on the bottom. So where you see the pipe is really dark, that is your flow line. So that's the part of the pipe that is generally full of wastewater all the time. So that part of the pipe isn't exposed to sewer gases, which means it doesn't corrode. The second layer is what we call aggregate. And so that's, corroded concrete, the steel's already gone, and that's what's left of the concrete pipe. And then of course at the top, all you've got is dirt, because the rest has collapsed, and you can see some of that pipe that was on the top is now laying in the bottom of that pipe. Prior to 2014, we didn't have an asset management program to do this type of proactive condition assessment work that we're now doing. And so since then, with support from council for CIP, we've been able to invest in the condition assessment work and avoid a number of SSOs as a result. Much of the work in the capital program that we're doing now, many of the pipes that we're replacing or rehabilitating, is much more proactive than it is reactive. So getting back to the CIP, condition assessment is a valuable tool for us to determine how to prioritize the CIP. It's the likelihood of failure component to the graph you see in front of you. Of course, the worse conditions something is in, the more likely it is to fail. But the other component is the consequence of failure. Is it a small pipe in a residential street that's unlikely to lead to a reportable SSO? Or is it a large pipe running adjacent to Crabtree Creek, Walnut Creek, or the Neuse River, where a failure will almost certainly lead to a reportable SSO? This information is really important in making decisions on how to proceed with our capital program. We're going to talk some more about some of the asset management projects, but I also want to touch on overflows related to wet weather. We define wet weather overflows as overflows that occur when the collection system is inundated with water as a result of a significant wet weather event. So again, referencing back to that large storm we had in November, I think it was of 2018, the photo on the left side of this slide, I think it's of Marsh Creek, actually, where the creek came up and was well above the collection system. And obviously some rain got into the collection system. So when we have large storms like hurricanes or those like that storm in 2018, there is a small percent of rainwater that enters our system, no matter how much we try to seal it off. These are the most challenging scenarios for us to prevent. However, through the CIP, we are able to prevent most SSOs during wet weather events. So how do we decide when and how to address wet weather capacity issues? Aside from observing SSOs, how do we know that there's even a capacity issue that needs to be addressed? The answer here is rooted in the sanitary sewer capacity study. It's essentially the master plan for our sewer collection system, and its main goal is compliance with EPA's zero tolerance policy for SSOs. We do have master plans for all the components of our system, but this is the one that really focuses on those wet weather events. You heard TJ mention that EPA audited our collection system and that we in 2011 and has checked back in with us multiple times since then, and that we never received a consent order. And this capacity study and the projects that come out of it are a lot of the reason that we didn't receive a consent order, because we had a plan for how we were going to address our SSO issues, and we were implementing that plan. This is not a plan that, we do a study and then we put it on the shelf and we never look at it again. This plan is something that we're working with all the time to continue addressing issues. It's updated about every 5 years, and it uses a hydraulic model to assess the system capacity. Now, what's great about our hydraulic model is that it's calibrated by a number of flow monitors that are in the system. We have permanent flow monitors throughout the system, and then every time we do an update of the capacity study, we install a bunch of temporary flow monitors. So we get a real understanding of how our system behaves under a number of different conditions. So dry weather conditions, wet weather conditions, extreme wet weather conditions. And that allows us to really understand what our system is doing and allows us to do the work to understand what changes we need to make in our system to make it perform even better. So as part of this master plan, we do evaluate growth projections, but the primary driver for nearly all of our capital projects on the sewer side of the house is wet weather. The peaking factors dictate that, and growth becomes just a small component of these projects. So out of this study come recommended system improvements, which become CIP projects. And those projects may alleviate current SSO issues, and they also they're also looking out into the future of how to prevent future issues from occurring. So let's talk about some projects. I've assembled a map here of a handful of impactful projects that have been completed or entered into the construction phase that are bringing significant benefits as it comes to SSOs. Now, the projects that you see here on the map represent about a $240 million investment into the system, so they're quite significant. So your yellow projects, the primary driver is wet weather, and your red projects, the primary driver is asset management. But I really want to emphasize here that most of these projects have some of both incorporated into them. So let's start, we talk a lot about pipe, but let's start inside the fence. And so the blue arrows that you see are pointing at two of the largest lift stations in the system. The one to the north is the Crabtree Creek lift station, and the one to the south is the Walnut Creek lift station. And the Walnut Creek lift station had condition issues, which were noticed by our operations staff. And so we undertook a project to rehabilitate that. And at the same time, did some expansion work that was going to be needed for wet weather issues. Around the same time, the Crabtree Creek lift station, which also happens to be of a very similar design because they were designed at the same time to the Walnut Creek lift station, we were getting ready to undertake a wet weather project there and discovered through condition assessment, that photo on the left that you saw earlier, that we had condition issues as well. So one of the big wins, particularly out of the Crabtree lift station portion, is we had to bypass the entire station to do the work onto it. So there were bypass pumps set up everywhere. And that allowed us to get a view inside some of the pipes immediately adjacent to the station that it's very, very challenging to access. And so when we got in there, we realized that we had some condition issues in some of these pipes as well. These pipes run under 440. So the picture in the top right-hand corner is the before of the 66-inch pipe, one of the 66-inch pipes, leaving the interceptor, leaving the lift station. And the picture below it, that's kind of a blue-green, that is the pipe after we rehabilitated it as part of the lift station project. And I don't want to sound dramatic here, but a failure of an interceptor of this size underneath 440 would have been a catastrophic failure. And you're probably talking about repairs in the maybe $10 to $15 million. This rehabilitation had a price tag of about $1 million for both the pipes that went underneath 440. Down in the southeast corner of the service area, you have the East Moose Interceptor, as well as the pump station and force main that convey wastewater to the Neuse River Resource Recovery Facility. This system is going to be the new backbone for the system coming from the Neuse River. The pump station and force mains are under construction and are due to be completed in about a year. And the pipeline, which will be the largest pipeline in our system, part of it will be 84 inches and part of it will be 96 inches in diameter. Construction is scheduled to get underway next month on that project. Council recently approved the award of that project to Park Construction. I didn't want to forget about a couple of the smaller projects that maybe don't carry the price tag in the tens of millions of dollars, but are still important. The project on the top right is the Brentwood Estates Improvements Project, which is just beginning construction now. And the project that you see inside the Beltline there is the Upper Pigeon House Interceptor Project that was completed in 2017. And that project is addressing sanitary sewer overflow issues with flows coming from the north side of downtown. We also have projects in the Walnut Creek Basin. This, the yellow line here represents 2 construction projects, one of which has been completed and the other which is expected to get underway sometime in the spring or summer. We're very close to being able to advertise those projects for construction. The Walnut Creek Basin does have wet weather flow issues, but not as severe as we've seen in Crabtree. It has a very significant asset management component. We've had several failures along those pipes, and we do know that there are condition issues, and those are going to be addressed as part of the wet weather project. And it wouldn't be an SSO presentation if we didn't discuss Crabtree Creek. And I say that because the vast majority of our overflows over the last 15 years have occurred in the Crabtree Creek Basin, many of which are along Crabtree Creek itself. And there have been a number of projects over the last 8 to 10 years to help alleviate sanitary sewer overflows. And I'm really pleased to share that we're seeing the benefit of those projects already. They're not complete yet, but because we have those flow monitors in the system, even beyond seeing a reduction in our SSOs, like TJ mentioned, we can see how the system from our flow monitors is behaving differently and responding better to these large wet weather events when they occur. So there were 2 large rehab projects that occurred along Crabtree Creek. And then, of course, there's been the construction of the 3rd interceptor along Crabtree Creek from the lift station at 440 and 64 all the way up approaching Glenwood Avenue. And that last piece will hopefully be complete this summer. Looking towards the future, there's more investment coming and more good things coming. And the great part of this story is this is where we're really starting to see the transition from being reactive to being more proactive. So turning back to the Crabtree Basin, the arrow on the left side is the Crabtree Valley Interceptor project. So that's the next piece of the interceptor along Crabtree Creek. This one happens to go near Crabtree Valley Mall. That project is under design right now and is expected to go to construction in fiscal year 2023. The arrow in the middle is the Mine Creek Interceptor. That's where we have the failure along Millbrook Road. There's a very significant wet weather component to that project. There have been some spills, but nothing as severe as what we saw for a long time along Crabtree Creek. And so we're working towards construction on that project. And then also probably getting into construction next year will be the replacement of the Big Branch Interceptor, where we did have a spot where we had that failure, though no SSO with that failure. And but there is a wet weather capacity issue in that pipe, and that's the primary driver. Down in the Walnut Creek Basin, we're going to continue working our way upstream to manage wet weather flows. So we're working our way to the west along Walnut Creek, and then also the line that's running north-south there is addressing some wet weather issues along Wildcat Branch. In the northeast corner of Raleigh, we have 2 projects along Perry Creek with some wet weather components. Asset management is pretty minor to that project, those 2 projects, excuse me. And then finally here on the east side of the service area, we've got 3 really significant projects that are a result of our proactive condition assessment work. So the project to the north is the West Neuse Interceptor project. The project in the middle is, we refer to it as a Crabtree Interceptor rehab project. And then the project to the south is the rehabilitation of our twin 72-inch interceptors that go from our largest lift station to the Neuse River Resource Recovery Facility. So they are a very critical backbone in the system. And all of these issues were discovered during proactive condition assessment. I feel like I should knock on wood when I say this, but we have not had any failures on those lines. But that picture that you see that I showed you earlier, that picture is from the inside of one of those interceptors there. So that's our clue that it's time to do something. So the total investment of these projects represents a approximately $250 million. I also want to be clear that I wanted to highlight a number of projects here, but that this is not exhaustive. And so we haven't talked about any of the small diameter replacement projects, which are replacing some of our clay lines, particularly in some of the older areas of the city. A lot of those lines are not in great shape, but really wanted to just hit some of the highlights as part of this presentation. This is how this kind of translates into the capital improvement program. These are two components of the approved capital improvement program from fiscal year 2021. And the asset management portion and the interceptor portion of the CIP do represent approximately 40% of the total capital improvement plan. And the drop off in interceptor work, I think, really represents the efforts that we're making in switching from being more reactive to making progress towards being more proactive with our projects. Now, of course, the other thing I think that's important to mention here is these categories. It's easy to categorize these projects as being ones that deal with SSOs, but a lot of our projects have a component to them that help alleviate SSOs. So looking to the future, as TJ shared, it is difficult to prevent all sanitary sewer overflows. There is a customer behavior component, which we do try to do outreach, and there are for sure some opportunities in that arena. And then there are these extreme wet weather events that we can't control, but staff feels that continued investments in the operating divisions as well in the capital improvement program will continue to minimize future SSOs. And with that, we are happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, team. I know that Councilmember Cox has a hard stop at 5, so I want to take a minute before we go to public comment and just see if council members have any questions before we do that. Okay. We will go to public comment. Mr. Chavis, I think we have one person on the line. Is that correct?
We did have one individual who signed up, but that individual did not attend the meeting, so we do not have any public comment today.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Knight.
I'll just say, real quick, thank y'all for this. It's a lot to take in, and we appreciate it. And maybe we could give y'all some follow-up questions since we've run out of time. So I got to contemplate a little bit, but I'll probably have some questions for you. But appreciate the presentation.
To clarify, we do not have to end the meeting right at 5. I'm just making sure that Councilmember Cox has time to ask questions before he has to jump off. So just to clarify.
I'm good. I agree with Councilmember Knight. If I have any questions, I'll follow up.
Thank you. Councilmember Fort, do you have any questions?
I don't know if I missed it, but there were some slides about DNR and DWQ and notice of violations. So I didn't know if they meant to include that or did I just miss it? Is it out of order? Or maybe it's just on the version I'm looking at, but pages 33 to 36.
We had a few extra slides that were just in case there were specific questions.
Right.
But we didn't want to get too far into the weeds.
That's fine. I just didn't know if I had missed something, so that's fine.
So I do have a couple questions and thoughts. First, thank you. I feel like y'all's department is one of our unsung heroes. Making sure that water and sewer move the direction they need to move all the time without the public ever knowing or thinking about it is like you just can't say how important it is. So first, thank you to y'all and to the entire team you represent. One of the questions I have, or it may be more of a comment, but I really appreciate the outreach y'all are doing around multifamily dwellings. around grease and oil. And want to make sure that we connect the dots on some of the work that Councilmember Melton and I have been doing to make sure we're doing more outreach to renters. So that may be more for our assistant city manager to kind of help us connect those dots to make it easier for y'all to reach those customers.
Very happy to work with you on that.
Yeah. And then in reaching those folks, it was the Mr. Lynch, I think it was your slide on follow-up actions. You talked about how we do a press release, we do educational materials, and reach out to some of our commercial users. I wonder if there's not something we could do to reach out to some of our other stakeholders. I'm sorry if you can hear children screaming in the background. It's that time of night. But to reach out to other stakeholders when SSOs happen as well, so that we can make sure that they are staying up to date, that they have data that they need, whether it's for helping us do better or thinking bigger picture about the entire new server system. So I would say any environmental advocates or stakeholders, any researchers at NC State or other universities, Councilmember Knight may have other thoughts on who else we should be thinking about, but would kind of look to y'all to think about how we could engage that group.
Happy to do that, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. We are all of our data is transparent. It's all public record, and we're transparent as an organization. It's part of our culture. Happy to share anything that we can with anybody.
Wonderful. And then the other question I would have, just kind of big picture, longer term, is making sure, and I know we're thinking about this as an organization in many ways, but making sure that we are thinking about how climate change and wet weather events, as they are increasing and intensifying, are impacting our system. And so we saw a lot about how wet weather impacts the entire sewer system. But as climate change happens, what are the kind of more resilient or adaptive policies or work we're putting in place to respond to that? I don't know if that's anything you need to respond to unless you're already on it, which I assume you might be, but just to kind of flag it.
So we do have on the capital side, one of the big things that's hard to predict are, storms, and it feels like storms are getting stronger and more frequent. And so that's something that we're always looking at. So when we did the first round of the sanitary sewer capacity study more than 10 years ago, we used a certain design storm, and then we recalibrated that when we did the update based on updated data. And as we're just getting into another round of updates, we're going to do that again. And we're also interested in the work that Stormwater is doing. They're looking at intensity, frequency, and duration of storms, and those are things that we're going to follow. And as we do this update, we're just barely getting underway. I don't even think in fact, I think you'll see the agenda item for the consultant selection here in the next few weeks. But we want to make sure we're synced up with what Stormwater is doing, the same way that we want to sync up with the planning department when we're doing population projections for these master plans. So that's an important component.
Great. And I feel like that might be a wonderful note to show that I feel like one thing that other cities don't have that we do is separate sewer and stormwater systems, and how important that is, like, in these moments. So yay, our original sewer and stormwater engineers. Any other questions or comments from council members? Okay. If there's a way we could get maybe a report back on thinking about those communications to other stakeholders in a future city manager report or otherwise, I think that would be great.
We'll certainly do that follow up, and to the earlier point, if other council members have questions or suggestions, they can feel free to reach out to me or directly to staff. I didn't recognize Robert Massengill earlier. He is on this meeting as well, just not visible on screen. So feel free to reach out to me or any of the other staff, and we'll certainly follow back up on opportunities and additional efforts with regard to communication and outreach.
Mayor Pro Tem, we really appreciate this opportunity. We rarely get an hour to present our information, so we used every bit of it, unfortunately. But we know these stakeholders and have relationships with the stakeholders that you're referring to, so we'll be glad to reach out with them and come up with a communications program so that they know what's going on and we're fully transparent.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Fort.
And I will say Robert and his team do an outstanding job. So I just wanted to say that to them and thank them publicly for all the hard work that they do, especially since they feel like they don't get a chance to hear from us very often.
Absolutely. And the only other thing I'd leave for council members then is to just think about this presentation as we move forward into the budget season. I'll just leave it at that. Lots of investments we need to make sure that we continue being a leader in this area. If there's nothing further, then I think we can adjourn. Oh, nope. I see our deputy city clerk. We need to make a motion to report this out with no action. Yes.
I so move.
And a second by Councilmember Knight. All right, all in favor? All right, that's unanimous with Mr. Cox having stepped out, but all right, thank you, and we'll stand adjourned.